Okay, then. Good morning, students. So we are into the end of the module 3, where we have discussed already a bit in the class. Like, we were talking about the various gear finishing process. Okay, we were mainly talking about the various gear finishing process. Hope you remember the various topics. In the second module, we have studied some of the gear finishing process. Can anyone of you tell me that what are the some of the gear finishing process we have done in the we have already done in the second module? But it was not gear finishing process, it was super finishing process. Do anyone of you remember about the super finishing process? Rahul Raji, can you tell me the answer? What do you mean by super finishing process? Am I audible? Students, am I audible? If you don't remember, no problem. Just tell me. I forgot. I can explain it.
Sir, audible.
Okay. So, Asaf, do you remember the various super? What is mean by super finishing process? Okay. So mainly what you mean by the super finishing process, it is mainly related to the accuracy related achievements, right? Accuracy related achievements in the various regards of the various super finishing process. That's what we say in the case of super finishing process. Okay. It is mainly regarding the various which is mainly regarding the various activities or various finishing process that is employed in the case of gear finishing. So mainly what we mean by gear finishing, manufactured by different machining process. So like, it is mainly divided by the manufacturing by the different machining process. That's what we say in the case of gear finishing. Okay, it's mainly manufacturing the different machining process. Okay, that's what we say in the case of gear finishing. It is mainly the manufacturing the various gear finishing process. So manufactured by different machining process which will have rough surfaces. These machine gears have the errors in tool particles, concentricity and hexatic angles. The various gear finishing operations are gear burnishing, gear shaping and gear lapping, honing, okay, brushing, all this. So all this we have already discussed in the modules. So now what we are going to say is we have a brief discussion about what are the various gear finishing process. What is the main purpose of gear finishing? To achieve the gear into the required shape, size, and dimensions. To mainly to achieve the gear as per the required shape, size, and dimensions. That is the main case in the case of gear finishing process or gear finishing process. In that gear finishing process, we have various types. Like according to the purpose, we have gear shaping, gear burnishing, gear finishing. Then all this to an extent we can say that it is all related to the material removal process, where the amount of material gets removed from the gear. Okay, where the amount of material gets removed from the gear. What is the material of the material which is mainly manufactured? It is namely, what's the name of the material which is mainly used for manufacturing gears? What we name it as? Can anyone of you say? We name it as the part. We name the part as something called. What anyone of you remember? Can anyone of you say what is the part or what is the name which is employed in the case of gear finishing? So when we take the material to the gear finishing, what happens? Or what is the material which is used for the production of gears? I have told in the class repeated times. Can anyone of you say?
Round blank.
What? One more time. പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ പറയൂ അസഫ് പറയൂ
Blank.
blank, yeah, that's what. അത്രേ ഉള്ളൂ. Round blank അല്ലേ? We use a round blank. Okay, we use a round blank. ഇത്രേ ഉള്ളൂ. ഇത്ര സമയം വേണം. We use a round blank. What is the purpose of the round blank? It is the base material which is mainly used for the production of gears അല്ലേ? So in our module we will be discussing about what the various types of gears, like bevel gear, worm gear, all that gears. Okay, we have to tell you. So in the case what, that's the various cutting of, that's the various cutting according to the number of cutting, depth of teeth, depth of material removal, number of teeth required, shape, size, all these factors comes into consideration in the case of gear cutting. That is the gear cut, the cutted gear gives a, to achieve the final product only we are doing the gear finishing process. Okay, so So what is the gear finishing process? It is mainly to achieve the gear into the required shape and dimensions at the proper rate. Like that's the required shape and dimensions at the proper rate. For this is the main purpose for what we receive gears. Okay, this is the main purpose for which we receive gears. This is what happens now. Like in the gear process also we have various types, like regarding the surface roughness and lapping and honing operation, broaching, all that aspects we have already studied. But in the case of here, in the case what? In the case of gear polishing, like we have gear burnishing. What is the purpose of gear burnishing? Method of finishing the gear teeth which are not hardened. Means it is a basic material. It's a process where the method of finishing the gear teeth has a happening, but it is not hardened. But it is also a cold working process. But it is also a cold working process. This is what happens in the case of this is what happens in the case of gear burnishing. Okay, it is not a cold working process. So that's what happens. So like what we say is, like, one second, what we say is, like, I'll just have an see now in the notes you said like gear finishing process. Hope so you are able to see the screen.
Sir.
Okay. So like the gear finishing process, like we have seen, see, it is the manufacturing by different machining process, which will have rough surfaces. That is, it is always will be having rough surfaces where the machine gears and may have errors in both the tooth profiles, concentricity, and helix angles, and various gear pushing operations are there. But what happens? What is the main purpose of a gear? The gear is mainly used for the what can anyone of you say? What is the main purpose of a gear? The main purpose of a gear
Uh,
is to uh, yes,
trans-
Rashid,
Increase the
tell me.
torque increase.
Yeah, to transmit
transmission.
torque and power from the engine towards the motion. Like in the case of automobile, we can say it is an engine towards the motion. That's what. So auto. So what are the basic factors? Okay, why do we do gear finishing? Why do we do gear finishing?
For smooth transmission of energy.
Yeah, for smooth transmission of energy. So in order to achieve that smooth transmission of energy, what are the gear particles, or what are the gear properties to be achieved? The base material of the blank should be
Corrosion free.
it should be corrosion free, and then what else? It should be hard, strong. It should be hard and strong, because why? At the time of changing the gears, enormous amount of load is applied, and due to regular conditions, what happens? What is produced? When the gear is changed, automatically, continuously, when the gear is changed, what happens? What what comes
Heat.
into output? Heat. Yeah, that's the thermal aspects, right? The mainly the heat and the thermal aspects comes into the output. That's what happens. So in order to achieve that, or in order to upgrade it, or in order to achieve or withstand all these factors, we should have the various we employ the various gear finishing process after the production of gears, right? After the production of gear, and in order to maintain the thermal conductivity, what we have, in order to have thermal conductivity, what we use in the case of gear, what we use.
Lubricants.
Yes, that's it. In the case we use lubricants, yeah. What's the main purpose of the lubricant? To absorb the heat and to absorb the temperature. This is what happens in the case of gear finishing. So now we will have a discussion like, so these all are the factors which we have to consider for gear finishing process. Like what? Gear finishing process, it is manufactured by different machining process. It is always manufactured by different machining process, like according to the purpose requirement fulfilling. Okay, then automatically when the gear is manufactured, it is not going to super finishing process. So what happens? Automatically it will have rough surfaces. This machine gears may have errors in tooth profiles, concentricity, and helix angles. So what happens in the case of gears? This gears are manufactured, and automatically it will have rough surfaces since cutting operations takes place. Not only rough surfaces, what all other factors should be considered? Can anyone of you say? What all other factors should be considered? Not only rough surface, also what all other factors? Adarsh Manohar, can you tell me what all other factors should be considered other than the rough surface? What all will be there at the time of cutting operation? Okay, the time of cutting operation, Adarsh. Okay, Adarsh, are you available?
Yes, sir.
If you don't know, you can say, "Sir, I forgot." No problem, but you have to speak up. Okay, and questions asked. Fine. Okay.
Okay.
Now, in the case of gear finishing process, automatically not only the material but also the rough surface, not only the rough surface but also the burrs. When doing cutting option, large amount of scratches, burrs, all will be there. You have to remove for in order to have a proper gear product, in order to have a proper finished product. So, in order for removal of material or removal of such blanks or cracks or not of cracks, the burrs like hard surfaces, hard strikes, shapes, everything will be there. In order to remove that, we will be having the gear finishing process. Like it is manufactured by different machining process, which will have rough surfaces, and the machine gears will have many errors in tooth profiles, concentricity, and helix angles. And the various gear finishing operations are first one is we are going to say about gear burnishing. Okay, so the method of finishing of gear teeth, which are not hardened, it's known as gear burnishing. Okay, the machining, the method of finishing of gear teeth which are not hardened. Mainly, the gear teeth are the gear teeth because it is not hardened. So, if the gear teeth is not hardened, what is the aspect? Can you
Breaking.
tell?
Which
Eh? Eh?
teeth will
Yes.
break.
The teeth will break. So, how do we cut gear teeth? Can you tell me any one single operation where the gear teeth are we are, like where the gear teeth are cutting?
Milling.
Milling. What is the purpose of a broaching tool? What is the purpose of a broaching tool? Any one of you can say. We have studied in this the same module. Broaching tool. The broaching
Material
tools.
removing.
Wait,
Uh,
material removing process.
Material removal process. Okay. So, or there also it also removes. It also helps in making of various types of
Yeah.
various types of teeth. Various types of teeth according to the purpose. Various types of teeth according to the purpose. This is what we say. Like how to say is like we are. I hope so. You remember in the broaching tool or in the broaching machine, we have drawn the various figures. Like what is the various types of what broaching, like surface broaching, hole broaching, key broaching, okay, and spline broaching, everything. So in this case, what happens is what in the broaching tool, what happens? The various types of teeth are employed. Okay, so in the same broaching tool, we have various types of teeth according to the purpose and the requirement. So the material removal rate is less, but comparatively material removal rate is high because why? A large number or a number of teeth are present, which helps in enormous amount of material removal. So all this happens in the case of gear finishing process. So in order that finally what is the main purpose of gear finishing process, and in the after the gear finishing, what we'll be having, we will be having a super finishing process. So like, we will be having a super finishing process where the accuracy rate, the blend, the surface finish, the material removal rate, the angle of the teeth, all this comes into action. So in the case of gear burnishing, we see we have a work gear, we have a burning gear, so the material removal gear. So all this happens what? The method of finishing of the gear teeth which are not hardened. So all this happens until the teeth is not hardened. Okay, this is what happens. So in the case of method of finishing of gear teeth which are not hardened, it is a cold working process. Why? Means the material is not hardened. So before the teeth gets cold or something like that, and it becomes strong enough, before that the material is removed. Like before that the material is removed. So why do we do gear burnishing? From this idea, can you say me? Can you tell me why do we do gear burnishing? Asaf, can you tell me why do we do gear burnishing? Asaf, are you available there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then why do we do gear burnishing?
Smooth air.
Smooth and to smooth is a
To
factor. Then
improve the surface finish.
to improve the surface finish. Then you are right. And to achieve what? And to achieve what does we achieve?
High accuracy.
Dimensional accuracy.
Yes, and to achieve closer dimensions, right? And to mainly to achieve what? And mainly to achieve closer dimensions. This is what happens in the case of gear finishing. Okay, mainly to achieve closer dimensions also. It also plays in a very important role in the case of gear burnishing. Okay, it also plays a very important role in the case of gear burnishing. So this is what happens. So here we have a gear finishing process where products are manufactured with the help of process manufactured process and gear burnish. Then we have a gear shaving process. Okay, a very hard gear shaving cutter is used to remove the chips from the gear teeth. The shaving cutter may be formed in the rack or a pinion mechanism. So if in some cases, okay, in some cases after regular usage, there will be change in dimensions. How does the change in dimension occurs in the gear blank after regular usage? Can anyone tell me? How does the change in dimensions occurs after the regular usage in the case of gear blank? Karthik, can you tell me? Karthik, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Karthik, can you tell me what is the factor of gear shaving? It is told as a very hard gear shaving cutters used to remove the chips from the gear tooth. So a very hard means what is the purpose? In order to remove the material. Okay. So why do we remove the material in the gear shaving process?
To
What will
get
be the purpose?
required dimension കിട്ടാൻ വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്.
Yes, to get the required dimensions. Yes, to get the required dimensions. In some cases, what happens after the usage of gears for a continuous purpose, due to some wear and tear or some ratio issues, what happens? The small bits of removal, and to have sometimes in some cases there will be a change in dimensions, everything. So, in order to make it, it's a very minor change. So, in order to make it to the perfect state, or in order to achieve to the close tolerance, what happens? We will be having gear shaving process in order for the removal of the material to an extent. Okay, so in this case it is very hard and very strong, so we have it in the form of a rack and pinion. So what? A large amount of pressure and force, a large amount of pressure and force is applied. Okay, a large amount of pressure and force is applied in the case of a gear shaving process. A large amount of pressure and force is applied in the case of a gear shaving process. That's what happens in the case of gear shaving. Then after the giver shaving process, all this process has been done for what? For having to achieve proper dimensions and to achieve proper accuracy in order to have better mating. What is the other major factor of the gear? Why should we have proper dimensions and the proper factors for the gear finishing and everything? What is the main criteria? For what is the purpose? If we don't have proper dimensions, what will happen? Mohammed Shahzad, Mohammed Shahzad, are you available there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So can you tell me what is the purpose of doing all this? The gear finishing process, gear burnishing, gear shaving, gear grinding, all that. Why do we this? What's the purpose? Why do we achieve? Okay, you'll say proper dimensions. That's it. Why do we require such a correct and proper and final dimensions in the case of gear?
Accurate ആയിട്ട് കിട്ടാൻ വേണ്ടി.
Yes, one purpose is accurate. So all this accurate and everything, accuracy or proper dimensional aspects, everything comes to one some other extent. What is that? If you don't have proper accuracy or proper thing, what will happen?
പ്രോപ്പർ ഷേപ്പ് കിട്ടുമല്ലോ വിചാരിച്ച ഷേപ്പ് കിട്ടുമല്ലോ.
Yes, there will be no proper shape. Why do we achieve proper shape? That's my question. Why do we achieve proper shape? what is the purpose of achieving proper shape? What is the purpose of achieving proper shape? Can you tell me what is the purpose? What is the purpose of achieving proper shape? What is the purpose of achieving proper shape? Can you tell me? What? Okay, okay, Shazab. The problem is like what happens is if you don't have proper accuracy at the border of the gears, we have a number of teeth. So number of teeth will be mating to the other gear teeth. So what happens if there is no proper dimensions? Automatically, when the rubbing action or when rotating action happens, what happens? There will be hard rubbing between the teeth, which result to the material removal or chipping of the material or even getting locking of the material, due to which enormous amount of heat is produced, to which when the enormous amount of heat and all this happens, automatically what happens? So all when such things happens, what will happen? Amit, when such things happens, what will happen? When there is no proper dimension and the meeting of gears are taking place and the meeting of gears are taking place and the accuracy rate and all other aspects are not proper, so the meeting is happening. So what will happen to the gear teeth? Amit, are you available there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So what will happen to the gear teeth?
Sir, breakage സംഭവിക്കും sir.
Yes, cracks and breaks, cracks and breakages will be happening.
Sir.
So since the cracks, okay, thank you. Since the cracks and breakages will be happening, what will happen? The purpose is not served. So in order to avoid what happens, the gear teeth are done at a proper measuring process, and in order to have better accuracy, then we comes into the gear grinding process. Okay, then we comes into the gear grinding process. So it is used for finishing gears after hardening. It is mainly used for finishing gears after hardening. Then it is done for increasing the accuracy of gears and improving the surface finish and removing the distortion due to heat treatment. That's what happens in the case of gear grinding. What does that means? It is used for finishing gears after hardening. It is mainly used for the finishing gears after hardening. Then it is done for increasing the accuracy of gears. It is mainly done for increasing the accuracy of gears and increasing the accuracy of gears and improving the surface finish and removing the distortion due to the heat treatment. This is what happened. The grinding process. Grinding process also material removal, but it is mainly related to the finishing process. It is always occurring after hardening. It is done for increasing the accuracy rules to attain the maximum accuracy and to improve the surface finish, so that the quality and the surface of the gear will be improved, and to removing the distortion due to the heat treatment. And doing large amount of process, what happens? Enormous amount of heat will be there and distortion will be out. To remove all this, we are doing gear grinding, and we have various grinding tools which are used for gear grinding. But in the case of gear grinding, what happens? What rate will be the material removal? Can anyone of you say? Anyone of you say what rate will be the material removal? Agash KM, can you say what will be the rate of the material removal in the case of gear grinding process?
Sir, sir, എങ്ങനെ ഗ്രൈൻഡിങ് പ്രോസസ്സിൽ ഉണ്ടാവുന്ന
Material removal rate will be high, normal, or minimum. We are told that we have to achieve accuracy, improving surface finish, and to remove the distortion due to hot heat treatment. All this we are using gear grinding process. Okay, and we are listed down the various types of gear grinding process also. I agree. My question is, okay, what is the purpose or what is the requirement? Whether in the case of gear grinding process, enormous amount of metal gets removed or a comparatively minimum amount of metal gets removed. That's one question.
സർ മാക്സിമം നമ്പർ ഓഫ് പാർട്ടിക്കിൾസ് റിമൂവ് ആവില്ല, സ്മൂത്ത് ആയിട്ട് അല്ല ആ ഒരു സർഫേസ് കിട്ടേണ്ടിട്ട്.
Okay, Agash. So it's a wrong answer. Like in the case of gear grinding process, it is always a surface. Like it is always a finishing operation. We have already told all this comes under gear finishing operation. So in gear finishing operation, what is the process? All this process comes under the material removal. Okay, all this comes under to achieve accuracy. So almost the workpiece will be close to the required dimensions. So in order to have, we are told to see for increasing the accuracy of gears means what? To increase the accuracy. Only for increasing the accuracy we are doing all this process. So by increasing the accuracy, always what happens? Only a comparatively minimum amount of material gets removed. That means already the gear will be into the close dimensional accuracy rate, but there will be some small changes. In order to avoid that, we are having what we are done gear grinding for material removal. So automatically in the case of gear grinding process, the material removal rate will be comparatively very low. Okay, not high. The material removal rate will be comparatively very low, since it is done for increasing the accuracy and improving the surface finish. So a very thin layer or a very minimum amount of material only will be getting removed from the gear or from the workpiece. That's what happens. Agash, are you clear about it?
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
Okay, so that's what happens. So that's what happens in the case of surface finishing and the removing the distortion due to the heat treatment. Then we comes about the form wheel grinding. Okay, then we comes about the form wheel grinding, where the grinding wheel is dressed to the form of toothpaste of the gear after grinding the teeth. In the case of form gear grinding, what happens is the grinding wheel is dressed to the form of the toothpaste. Okay, in this case, the grinding wheel is dressed to the form of the toothpaste of the gear. So after grinding one toothpaste, the work gear is indexed to the next toothpaste. This is what happens. The work gear is indexed to the next toothpaste. That's what happens. So the grinding wheel is decided the form of the toothpaste of the gear, and after grinding one toothpaste on the work gear is indexed to the next toothpaste. This is what happens in the case of form wheel grinding. So what happens is here we have a grinding wheel is dressed in the form of a toothpaste of the gear. After grinding one toothpaste, the work gear is indexed to the nearest toothpaste or the next toothpaste. That's what happens. Okay, to the nearest and the next toothpaste. So what happens in the case of formed wheel gearing? In the formed wheel grinding, what happens? Always the teeth shape and the teeth size will be almost uniform. So uniform number of teeth with the different cut section according to the number will be divided, and the process will be taking place to an extent to the proper rate. This is what happens in the case of form wheel grinding. So the material removal rate will be uniform, and also the gear teeth, the dimensions of the gear teeth and number of teeth will be always planned, and the dimensions of the gear will be same, and almost the angle, the shape, the structure, the size, everything will be almost the same, the replica. This is what happens. Then next one is generation of gear grinding. Okay, we are telling, this all comes under gear grinding. So where under which topic comes the gear grinding? Amit, under which topic comes under the gear grinding? Amit? Okay. I think so. Amit has left the meeting. There will be some issues. We'll see to it. So now, in the case of, okay. In the case of gear, generation gear grinding, what happens is this all comes under, we already know, okay, this all comes under gear finishing process, where in the case of generation of gear grinding, the work gear is rolled, the work gear is rolled along an imaginary rack. Okay, in the case here, the generation gear grinding, what happens is the work gear is rolled along an imaginary rack. Here the work gear is always rolled along an imaginary rack, and the rolling is done in both the directions to grind both sides of the tooth, and the work gear rotate about its own axis. So in the case of generation gear grinding, here the major difference is like the rolling is done on both the directions to grind the both sides of the tooth in order to achieve proper dimensions and proper accuracy rate, everything. So this is what happens in the case of generation gear grinding, where the work gear is rolled along an imaginary rack. Okay, here the work gear is rolled along an imaginary rack, and the rolling is done in both the directions to grind both sides of the tooth, and the work gear is rotated about its axis. This is what happens in the case of generation gear grinding, where the work is rolled along an imaginary rack. There will be an imaginary rack or an identified rack which is not marked. That's what happens. So the work gear is rolled in imaginary rack, and the rolling can be done in both the directions to grind both sides of the tooth. This is a major important factor, where the rolling is done at both the directions to grind both sides of the tooth, and the work gear rotate about its axis. And also in this case, the work gear rotate about its axis. That's what happens. The work gear rotate about its axis. Then the case of gear lapping. Okay. Then the next one is the case of gear lapping. Here, hardened gears are finished accurately by lapping process, and lapping removes very small amount of metal, not more than 0.05 mm, and the work gear is rolled between the lapping gears. Okay, so automatically the work gears are always rolled between the lapping gears, which are mostly made of cast iron, and the lapping gears are arranged at 120 position around the work gear. So this is what happened. This we have already mentioned in our gear burnishing process where the arrange at 120 angle around the work gear. The work gear for material removal will be the most suitable range is 120 degree. Okay, in order to transmit power and the material removal to an extent without much errors that's happening at the time of a gear putting process. This is what happens in the case of gear lapping process where it is hardened gears are finished accurately. In this case, the hardened gears are what happens is the hardened gears are finished accurately by lapping process and removes very small amount of metal, not more than 0.05 mm, and the work gear is rolled between the lapping gears, okay, which are mainly made of cast iron. Okay, it is mainly made of cast iron and arranged in a 120-degree position around the work gear. This is what happens in the case of gear lapping. So this all are the various Anirudh, can you tell me what we were discussing about the various what
Or grinding.
grinding? Okay, grinding. Okay, so all this grinding, everything comes under which process? All this grinding and everything comes under which process? Yeah. Okay, all this grinding and everything comes under the various gear finishing process. Okay, which is on the last topic, almost the last topic of the module. Almost the last topic of the module 3. Okay. Okay, Anish. Okay, fine. Okay. Then after gear grinding, okay, after gear grinding, what we have? We will be having a surface roughness. Okay, we will be having a surface roughness and the various what happened. Not only the surface roughness and also the mainly it is the super finishing operation. Okay, it is mainly the super finishing process. After the gear grinding, everything we have the super finishing operation. So in the super finishing, what happens? See, super finishing is a micro finishing process. It is mainly a micro finishing process. We have already discussed the previous module. Like super finishing, what happens? The super finishing is a micro finishing process. Okay, so after the gear grinding process or after the gear finishing process, we will be some cases we will be having what super finishing process. All these are in order to achieve the maximum surface finish accuracy rate and in order to have better dimension. So when the mating of the gears is taking place, there is no amount of error which may result in the rubbing action or a vibration or the chipping of the teeth, chipping of the metal removal. That's the metal gets removed from the teeth and the teeth dimensions or the shape will get changed. All this to avoid or to eliminate all these aspects, we are doing all these operations here. So in the case of super finishing operations, mainly it is a micro finishing process that produced a controlled surface condition. Okay, that mainly produces a controlled surface condition on parts which is not obtainable by any other method. Then it is an abrasive process which utilizes either a bonded abrasive like honing for cylindrical surfaces or a cup wheel or for flat surfaces. This is what happens in the case of super finishing process. So it is also a micro finishing process. Okay, it is mainly also a micro. Okay, it is mainly also a micro finishing process that produces a controlled surface condition on parts which is not obtainable by any other method. See, it is a super finishing is a micro finishing process that produces a controlled surface condition on parts which cannot be obtained by any other method. That's what happens. Okay, then the super finishing is also similar to honing. Okay, it is also similar to honing, which we have discussed in the last module, which is similar to honing, but it involves in the use of a single abrasive stick. But here we have a single abrasive stick. Okay, then in this case, instead of a lubrication, we are using a cutting fluid is used to cool the work surface and wash away the chips. In the case of gear finishing process, we are using a lubricant, the same thing to cool the to maintain the thermal conductivity and the thermal aspects. But in this case, what happens is we have a cutting fluid is used to cool the workface and the wash away the chips. This is what happens. And in this case, another factor is like the reciprocating motion of the stick is performed at higher frequency and smaller amplitude. Here, the reciprocating motion. I hope so. You know what is the to and from motion. Okay, the reciprocating motion of the stick is performed. It's always performed at higher frequency and smaller amplitude. That's what happens at a higher frequency and smaller amplitude. That's what happens in the case of reciprocating motion. So the reciprocation motion of the stick is performed at a higher frequency and smaller amplitudes. Okay. So also the grid size, the pressure applied on the abrasive stick are smaller, and the cutting fluid is used to cool the work surface and the wash away chips. This is what happens in the case of mainly in the case of super finishing process. So after the gear grinding process, then we will be having the various super finishing process. Okay, the various super finishing process will be having. So here in the case of gear grinding process, material removal for better accuracy finishing, and in the case of what gear grinding, there are various types of gear grinding. Then gear lapping will be taking place. Then finally we have the super finishing process. Okay, which comes under it comes under surface operable lapping, honing, and broaching process. Okay, it comes under lapping, honing, and broaching process. So all this comes under the lapping, honing. This is named as the mainly the super mainly named as a super finishing process operation. This is what happens. Okay, so by this almost we come to the end of the module. Okay, that was the last topic. So, and also I have given assignments and some of them all are completed. Please finish it on time. Okay, please finish it on time. Okay, so the last date is approaching. So that I hope so you remember the assignment topics which was given. It's like why gear finishing process are required. So that's what we have to do. That's what we have discussed today. Then what are the advantages and limitations of gear shaving and gear lapping process with the neat sketches. Okay, so this is the assignment. So we have already discussed, we have given already an idea about the same class regarding the gear finishing process and the advantages and limitations of gear shaving and gear lapping process. So please submit the assignment on time. Okay, then okay, I shall take your attendance. Please stay online itself. Okay.